We welcome you to the Priscilla R. Tyson Cultural Arts Center for our Conversations and Coffee on this 12th day of December 2024. I'm Ellen O'Shaughnessy, coordinator of the program. We celebrate today 3 artists, Jennifer McCracken, Maureen Delphia, and Joyce Dorn. Want to stand up here? Yeah, no. Well, we thank you for being with us and bringing us such beauty and talent from the stunning Loft Gallery exhibit that's here in the Cultural Arts Center, which we'll be visiting around the corner the last 10 to 15 minutes of our gathering. Jennifer McCracken is co-creator of the Loft Gallery exhibit, shared with Christine Cooper Hill, our guest artist of last week, with Franco Ruffini and Talcon Quinn. Jennifer is a Midwestern-based enameling artist. She enjoys the vibrant colors and textures that can be produced with enameling. Enamel work has seized her imagination, she shares, as it provides the opportunity to create sculptural pieces using glass and wire working techniques to produce painted wall hangings and jewelry. Jennifer is instructor here at the Cultural Arts Center and has served as an administrator. She shares with us today her students, Maureen and Joyce, their enameling artwork in the show, which is entitled Cold Connections. And you'll explain to us why it is that it's cold connections. Jennifer is also a graduate of Columbus College of Art and Design in 1990. She studied enameling at the Cultural Arts Center, creating jewelry out of copper enameling. Jennifer is inspired by the Asian culture as she spent 19 years doing missionary work in Taiwan. The carefree dogs that she met on the streets of Taiwan inspired her enameling pieces. My husband and I purchased one of her beautiful enameling works of those dogs, as we have our precious dog Rudy immortalized by her art. Isn't that wonderful? And we have named, this is a primary place in our home. A place in our home where we meet Rudy every day. So thank you, Jennifer. Jennifer shares that she likes walking through the woods with certain elements. And those elements then inspire you for your work, huh? With my art, I express the feeling of dimension that attracted me in the beauty of the walk, viewing trees, vines, rock formations. And Jennifer, we thank you for sharing your amazing art and introducing your students in enameling and jewelry making. Maureen Delphia and Joyce Dorn. Thank you and welcome.
Just to note, Joyce is actually an instructor. I don't believe you took one of my classes, but you are already an instructor and already had learned a lot. So, yeah. Well, I don't actually have a piece in the show because I just didn't have time. But I brought in one of my pieces from a previous exhibit called The Taiwan Dog that kind of exemplifies some of the cold connections. And a lot of my work, not all enamelists want to connect pieces together, but it's something that I like because I do layers, as you can see with the dog piece. This is actually 3 layers of copper that were enameled separately. And with enameling, you want to limit the number of firings you do because you're putting it in a kiln, you can't see it, you close the door, and so you want to be able to control as much as you can. If you fire it too much, it starts to degrade and get all like ashy and black around the edges, and so you lose some of the color. So that's why the cold connection. I've worked through my processes, and I've done a few different. Oh, I must have hit the button. Sorry. So I tried to figure out a lot of different ways to connect my layers. And one of the first ways I did it was with fusing. So all the orange pieces are separate pieces that I had to enamel the back and then enamel the front, of course, to get the color. And then I laid all of the pieces onto the base that is blue that I kind of painted a background, and then put it in the kiln, pulled it out, and then took a very heavy piece of metal and placed it on top so it would kind of squish into, and then as it cooled, the glass would connect to each other. So it's kind of like glass fusing, but with metal on glass, or glass on metal. So, and that doesn't always work because glass can expand or contract depending on the temperature. And so can the metal. And so sometimes the pieces will pop off. So I have to glue them, which isn't the best. You want to kind of have a pure way of putting your pieces together, and glue is kind of like the last resort. So glue. And that's kind of what I did with the dog piece. I had the layers and I placed them in the frame and then glued the edges to the frame so that it would stay. So it's kind of, because of the frame, I had it secure and I didn't have to put as much glue, but that was one way I resolved to solve the problem. And then there's soldering, which isn't a cold connection. It's using heat and flux that you melt and put two pieces together by fusing metal with like an extra piece of soldering wire. And but the problem with soldering is, let's see, melting points. The basic solder that I learned to use melts before the enamel melts. So if I solder two pieces of metal, cover with enamel, stick it in the kiln, it fell apart. So I couldn't use the soldering. Now there is actually a solder that will not melt. It will stay together, but I didn't learn that yet, so I didn't do soldering for my enamel. Let's see. So the solution is rivets, and that's one of the main ways that I would connect my pieces. That piece has about 5 different layers that I had to drill holes into each corner, and then you take basically a wire that you then hammer the top and bottom, and it kind of squishes together like a nail head, and it holds. Yeah. Well, it's right here. So that's part of the piece. So this is one of the rivets that I had to hammer. And you have to be very careful because if you hammer on glass, you can kind of crack the glass too. But it did work. And you can also, there's riveting tools. I was going to bring one, but I forgot it, where you just kind of crank down a piece that will just smush it. And that works really well, so you don't have to put as much pressure on it, and you pound your piece. Now I wanted to introduce, because there's 2 people that were in the exhibit that are exceptional enamelists, but they weren't able to be here. Corona Spurgeon, she's an instructor, and her piece right here. Okay, there it is. So she used folding to connect her enamel frog to the branches that she used in wire. So before she fired her piece, she folded the hands so that they would kind of grab onto the wire, and then attached it to the wire just by kind of hooking it on. So that's one way you can utilize. The benefit of metal is you can shape it and fold it and do all sorts of things with it. And then the other student, Patty Wilson, she used prongs. You can see right here, she'll use the prongs. So the enamel piece is this right here. And then she cut out this metal piece. And underneath it is another piece with prongs that holds the flower image together. So, yeah. So, and it's nice because as artists, you may not always have, a torch available or different techniques that you may not learn, but you can do really simple things like just creating the prongs and or folding it or using glue. But so those are just some examples of how we can use cold connections with enameling. And Joyce is going to go next and talk about her work.
So the piece that I have out in the show is a cloisonne piece, and then it's also connected with a tab setting as well. So it's a piece set upon another piece, and the tabs hold the front piece to the whole cloisonne artwork piece. So what I've brought here to show you is just some of the other work that I've done. The piece that I've done out there is a cloisonne piece, and I brought a couple pieces that are also cloisonne. And the cloisonne is where you set a thin wire, and then you attach that to your base piece, and then you wet pack where you take the dry powder and you wet it, and then you just gently pack in the wet enamels so that you can then let it dry, and then put it in the kiln to fire it. So some of the other work that I brought here, so I even have like a pair of earrings. So your cloisonne is not limited to just being a large piece. You can do it on small pieces as well.
Would you be able to pass anything of that around?
Yes, I will. Yep. So this piece here was done, and I learned how to do this recently in a recent workshop that we had over the weekend in the beginning of November. And then after that class, then I did this piece as well. So just taking a piece and just doing a little bit more cloisonne, a couple of colors added to it as well. Some of the other work that I've done is a lot of it, when I first started, I was just learning, and that's the one thing that I've always said, I'm constantly learning with enamels. It's not something that you know, but there's so much more to learn with the enamel process. So when I first started, basically, I was just applying colors to metal, and then applying colors, and then matching it to the jewelry pieces. And then always doing pieces that you can support your team as well. So that's the fun part too. It's not just limited to just jewelry. And then some of the other work that I have here are Christmas ornaments that have been done. And some of them are different, using different processes, including stencils and crackle, and then just applying and coloring it that way. So this is one that was done with a stencil. Looks like a little gift wrapped. So, all right. So that's what I have. Like I said, always learning.
So with your enameling, what is your temperature that you usually bring the kilns to fire some of these pieces?
It depends on the process that you're using. Normally, if you're just firing just the straight enamels, I usually bring it to about 1460, 1470. Some of the enamel work has to be done at a lower temperature because you don't want to melt the wires that are attached to the piece. So those are usually about 1400 to 1420.
So does the enamel come in different colors, or how do you add the color to it?
The colors are already set in the enamels, so we have that down in the studio. There's a large number, at least 100, I'd say. It's just using it. And then there's different ways that you can apply it to make different layers of color. So if I was to take like these pieces here and just continue to apply the blue color it would continue to get a little bit darker after every firing.
But you don't know really what it's gonna look like, right?
You know the colors when you go and you start. So you do know the colors. It's just that there's sometimes at the end, it's a gift from the kiln.
This is an artist speaking to an artist.
Okay, any other questions?
What is your favorite part of enameling?
Oh, a lot of it depends on my mood. But the more and more that I work with it, I really enjoy the cloisonne. And a lot of people say the cloisonne is the most difficult to do because the wires that you're using are so thin and so tiny that they're easy enough that they'll fall over, or you can overpack and you lose the wires in the piece. And that's where you just have to be very aware of what it is and where you're going and watching it after every firing. Because sometimes you can have a cloisonne piece that you're going to fire at least 5 or 6 times. And every time you fire it, it changes the dynamic of the enamels that you've already applied as well. Mm-hmm.
Do you sketch your design out before you start?
That is one thing that I've been learning to do. So he asked, do I sketch out my design before I get into it? And that's something that I learned and something that I've been doing more and more, because by sketching it out, and believe me, I'm a horrible sketcher, so we're lucky if it turns out. It helps you to understand how you, and where you want the wires. And if you've got a picture of what you want the end piece to look like, then you're able to at least have it set, and you can set your wires on that drawn out sketch rather than doing it straight onto the metal pieces.
How do you set your wires, like with tweezers or?
Yes, with tweezers, and there's a liquid adhesive, and you put that on there. You have to let the piece dry once the wires are all set, and the wires have to be pretty flush to the base piece that you're using as well. Otherwise, you get where the color flows underneath the wire, and that kind of offsets how you were originally planning the piece to work.
I see a lot of your pieces are small, like earrings and so forth. Mm-hmm. Have you done something like the size of Jen's piece right there behind her?
So I have done a couple what I call art pieces. One piece that I did, it's down in the studio in the cabinet on display. And it was riveted. It's birds and butterflies, and they're all kind of domed. And so you had to rivet them to the base piece, and then you cover up the rivets. I covered up the rivets with enamel. And so it's something new that I've just started, and I've got some ideas in my head that I want to try and work out and add and make changes to. So, like I said, I'm always learning.
So in that case, when you're making something like that, you definitely sketch it out, right? I mean, you definitely give yourself a little bit of a guide.
Yes, I actually used graph paper for the piece that's down there, and I had everything drawn out and sketched out, and it had everything. I even had the colors of the enamel that I was going to use, so that everything was right there, and I had it as a reference.
Beautiful work.
Thank you. All right, so we will hand it off to Maureen.
Okay. Well, let's start with the things that are a little bit different. I have some other little pieces here. These are, let's look at this one first. This is my Jingle Bells, okay? Up here, better? Okay. This is called fold forming, where you take a piece of metal. This was a flat piece of copper, and you heat it up, and then you bend it to the shape you want. Then it gets stiff, because when you work the copper, it hardens. Then you heat it again, and then you bend it, and then you heat it again, and you bend it until you get what you want. Now, the talk is on cold connections, And this is loosely cold connection. If I wanted to make this a little firmer, I'd take some wire and I'd wrap the back of this in order to make it stick together without being a jingle bells, okay? And then there's wire in here, and there's some little bumps on the end of this wire. And if you take copper wire and you put it in a torch or even silver wire and you heat it up, you can get a little ball on the end of your wire. So that's how these little things in the middle are made. Now, these are the same as that, but they had a little bit more work done to them. They're a little bit wiggly, depending on how tight I made them. The centers were not cut from the same piece, but all the flowers are one flat piece. You draw what you want to cut. Then there are these scissors called Joyce Chen scissors, which are actually for cutting chicken bones, but they cut metal great. Now again, if the metal gets hard, I have to heat it. When it's soft, it's easier than cutting a piece of cardboard. But as soon as it gets cold, you can't do anything. So you cut it, then you fold it. There are creases in this thing to make whatever shape you want, okay? Then the centerpiece is another wire that, again, you heat, you twist, you play with until you get a shape you like. These are fairly well cold connected. They might be held a little tiny bit by the copper that's fired on them, but the copper's not really strong enough to totally support the piece. Now,
What do you use to cut film?
I love the scissors. They are, there's some of these metal cutters that are heavy and bulky. These are easier to work than a pair of sewing scissors. They are nice. So all these center wires here, whatever the center pieces are called, those were cut with scissors. Now, most of the enamel we do use is powder. There's no freaking way I can make powder stick to this thing, okay? If I sift it down, it's all gonna fall. If I turn it over and sift it, it's gonna fall, okay? There's another type of enamel called liquid enamel. That's a very, 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 very fine ground glass. I think they put a little clay in it so it can go on just basically like liquid. Maybe a cream consistency. So you paint the liquid on here, dry it 100%, and then you fire it. And I usually fire them upside down. Because these tops or centers are connected, they're not going to fall off on me. Now, this is, there are different kinds of whites too. Some of these are a semi-white, some is a little more true white or opaque white. So this is all liquid enamel. Now, these were these, okay? These also had to be coated with something. Actually, one of these might have just been patiently using glass. This one looks like it was glass. This one was glass. But it's difficult to get it to stick. Sometimes there's a something called clear fire. It's like a liquidy glue that you can paint on and then sift your powder on to try to make it stick. This one, I can see the white through the pink, so I know that I put liquid enamel on this one first. Again, you cut them with flat, design what you like, twist it, come up with something. And I've done some roses. These are, you can make different tulips. You can make anything you want. Just have to keep heating it. Okay.
You're heating it over and over. Those seem to be kind of labor intensive. So what kind of, if you could estimate, how many hours would you have in a piece?
Oh man, I don't even count my hours anymore. It's therapy, you know? How much time you want to relax? I mean, I could cut one of these in probably 30 minutes. Heating it, this is a top secret, okay? I heat it at the kitchen sink, okay? Shh. It's a kitchen sink with a landing, and so I have enough stuff on top of the landing that I won't burn my countertop. And the fire extinguisher's on one side, the water's right there, and that's where I do a lot of the work. With a torch. With a torch. These are torched. If you get a good hot torch, you can, and you heat the copper until it's almost a bright red. And then when it's really hot and all red, you cool it for just less than a minute, 30 seconds, and it'll turn black. And then you dip it in the water that's in the sink waiting for it.
A secret, but this is propane torch, hand torch.
Yeah.
And your insurance and all that.
They don't know about that.
Okay.
Well, you could,
On TV, maybe, I don't know.
this isn't like a huge torch. This is like, the propane little torches that you can use if you go camping. These aren't the big outdoor grill things. These are little, and I put it in a stand. It's not just sitting there. They're put in something so they can't tip over.
Couldn't start a fire because I got it.
But it has you push a button, and so if you let go of it, it turns
It goes off. You turn it on and you let go, it goes off.
A lot of work in your kitchen with this particular project when you do it. I mean,
Right. Right. Right.
please move on. I'm sorry.
Well, see, I had a garage. Okay? I had a garage, okay? Then my husband had the garage, okay? Now I have a piece of the garage, and my square of the garage is about this big. Not enough room. And we tried doing some torching outside, and we used this acetylene torch. We hadn't done much of that before. And you take acetylene and oxygen, and you turn on the acetylene, and then you add the oxygen. But if you don't turn the oxygen on fast enough, you make all this black, sooty smoke that goes everywhere. And the first time we tried it, it was a windy day. So I feel a little safer in my kitchen, okay? So this is one technique. And the fold forming's fun. You can make all sorts of stuff with bending, okay? Now, these are two little tiny pieces. I'll pass them around. One little piece, this little one, it's another idea with fold forming on a bitty form. There's one rivet on here holding these pieces together. Because it's not enameled, because it's not soldered, I can enamel this. It will not hurt the piece. I could take a little liquid enamel and put it on the rose. I could make it white and paint the part of it green. So I could do anything enameling with this little piece. Now this is a similar concept, similar looking piece. I could not enamel this because the leaves are soldered on. And as soon as I put this in the kiln, heated it up, my leaves are going to loosen up and come off.
Kind of solder that you could have used.
There is something called eutectic solder, and it's a silver and copper. It's a little bit different combination, and I think it's like 15. It's higher than you can melt your enamel and not ruin it. Now, you could probably go high enough to do that damage too, but when you know you have that type of solder on it, you just make sure that you don't overheat. And you can melt enamel by going way up to that temperature. You can also melt it by going not quite so high and going longer. So if you had something that you had used this eutectic solder on, you'd probably be more careful to do it a little bit lower temperature and a little bit longer so you don't lose your pieces.
But you're torching, you're not baking. You can't put it somewhere and just bake it. Oh, the kiln does.
The kiln. Now the kiln, if I was going to, oh, here it is, sorry. If I was going to enamel this, I'd use the kiln. I could use my torch, but I'd probably use the kiln for this. And this one, again, I would lose this. I think the rose is also soldered on. Okay, so I'll pass these two. So these are two different examples of a very similar product done two different ways.
When you're using your torch, you don't have any idea temperature-wise what it's at. You just fire it until it gets to the red color.
What's nice about a torch is even if you do enameling, which you can do with a torch, you get to see the process. When I heat up metal, I see the colors changing. I see that this part of the flower petal is completely red. I get the whole thing looking at, so I can watch and see exactly what I'm doing. Same thing with enameling. If you enamel with a torch and you go from the bottom, you have a powdery glass, then you watch it just sort of start to melt. Kind of like if you were having crystals in some sugar thing on the stove. You start watching it just sort of melt, and then it gets really liquidy and smooth. So you can watch the whole process when you torch something that you don't get to see happening in the kiln, which is kind of a nice way to learn how enamel behaves. Now, this is another example of rivets, and I'll pass this around. This was an odd little piece. This was a mistake, okay? There's something you can do that you can get a chemical to eat into the metal. So you can make this picture on the metal, and where you cover with call it tape. It's not exactly like tape, but you cover up everything you don't want the metal to eat into. And then you get the whole or the picture. The flower on here is what the metal ate, okay? The metal was not supposed to eat through to the back of this piece of metal, but I left it too long. So I ended up with this top piece, which was open with spaces. So I could not solder this well to the back plate. So that's why I use these little rivets to attach it, and then I stuck the solder inside. So this was a kind of a fun, it took me a long time to figure out what the heck I was going to do with this thing. But this is, again, the 4 little corners are rivets. Okay.
So, looking at what you did and then what it ended up being, could you estimate how many hours you have in that piece?
Oh, man. First of all, okay, let me show this to you here a minute. There's a problem with this piece that I learned about. I will not do this again. These are held by the rivets. There's a little tiny bit of space between the top and the bottom. And when enamel is heated, it likes to run into the spaces. So I discovered that it started bulging out a little bit. It's like, oh man, what am I going to do? So I'd heat it up and push it down. And then I had to add a little bit here and there and then color. This is no less than 6 times minimum. And then I didn't like some of the center, so I added these little dots to it. So that was another firing. Those are watercolors dots that are also enamel type watercolor. So some of these things you make them, they're fun. Sometimes they're one of a kind. I don't sell them. I just put them in the cupboard, basically. My china cupboard's full of stuff.
You had to sell them and you put an hourly rate on your work.
Oh, you could not. You could not. You couldn't afford them. And with silver now is running about $30 an ounce, way up there. So go ahead.
Go on.
So I make the things not so much to have to sell. And the other problem when you make something, many times your things come out one of a kind. And it's easier to sell something if I know I can duplicate it. But when you know, I can't do this again. I made a really beautiful piece. It looks like a little Monet, okay? Now, I couldn't repeat this, okay? Because I was taking class at night, and I was driving home, and I got to the bridge. And I remembered that the piece was still in the kiln. So I turned around to get it out of the kiln. And it is a beautiful piece. Never could I. I didn't even know, I couldn't even begin to do it again.
Look like a mistake.
I know that's
Well, I worked hard to make it not look like a mistake, but believe me.
See a good one if this was a mistake.
Yeah, go ahead.
This is lovely.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
And you can see if you have the two together, one is soldered and one is one cold connection, pulling it all together.
Soldering is a very hard thing to learn.
Yeah, you can really.
It's myself.
And the problem is, sometimes it's hard to. I always want to use more solder than I need to use, and the solder runs, so it's hard to.
This depends on what metal you're working with. You know, gold, if you heat it up, you burn all the gold. You know, the
Oh, and you
silver-
can really melt silver.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's easy.
It's amazing how the metals, certain metals will vaporize or melt very quickly, you know.
Now here's one last piece. This is an example of a cold connection, but this is not all a cold connection. In the center is the cloisonne. You learn things when you do things that you find out later. If one puts yellow next to silver, they don't like each other at all. And the yellow will start to look brown, really an ugly color. So I had to work pretty hard to get his eyes corrected because when I made this, I didn't know at that time or hadn't learned that be careful with your yellows. Then so this is a cloisonne. The outside thing, I took twisted wire and made 2 circles. Now the 2 circles I did have to solder together because I couldn't hold them any other way. But the 2 circles are held with what would be considered a cold connection. I took little pieces and bent these to hold it together. So the outside 4 pieces are true cold connections. The center one, circles, have some solder on it. Okay? We can pass that around.
Fire these pieces in the kiln, how do you place them in there if the enamel melts? Do you place them on something?
Oh, yeah. You learned that too, okay? There are these things called trivets, okay? Think of it as a little triangle thing, something like this, and you could put your piece, sit that in there, so it would rest on there. And there are different sizes of these things and different shapes of these things. And if you have no enamel on the bottom, the first time you can just put it on this metal grid type thing. But once you have enamel on the bottom, you have to put it on something, otherwise you're going to make that stick to the metal. So there are different ways of holding things. Sometimes the last time of the earring, I'll put a little wire through the earring, and they have another thing. You can hang your earring from this piece kind of shaped like this so that you could get the whole thing to kind of cook evenly as your final product. And these things I would hang upside down with one of these prong-like things like this, and they'd hang from the prong. You go ahead and back.
That one here, this one here, you got that metal in the back.
Right. That one's probably the cold connection. If it's got one hole in the back, that's holding everything together. There's a rivet there. Yeah.
I'd be really interested to hear how each of you got interested in this in the first place, because it's not kind of a common thing.
I'm not sure what I did because I never had art in high school. I never had art in college. I never had any art. And I was still working, and I think I was just looking for something to do outside work. And that's how this all started. So probably 10 years ago, you just start, and then things kind of grow and you learn more. And think of with enameling, you can do anything. You can
Doing it or what?
I think the first thing I did, I took a jewelry studio. And there you learn all this other stuff, okay? And they offered like a Saturday afternoon class where you learn how to fold a butterfly out of copper and put enamel on it. And that was my first exposure to enamel, and I really liked it. So I started down here just taking a jewelry, kind of just to have something to do once a week to kind of forget work and get away from things. And then once I got touch that enamel stuff, and I actually like the metal forward forming stuff. Then I kind of got hooked. So
Well, my mother-in-law had a piece of artwork that I couldn't figure out how it was made. It was very smooth and it had some kind of texture in it, and it was like a bouquet of flowers. I always wondered, how was that made? And then I was taking a jewelry class, and I noticed that there was another class on the other side, and I saw, oh, what is this? And I saw this wall of colors and just smooth glass-like objects. And the instructor was like, that's enameling. I'm like, oh, I want to do that because it just, the color and it showed me how the artist created that piece that my mother-in-law had. And so I've been trying to, grasp all the techniques, and I just love it. And it really feeds into my sculptural experience and painting experience as well, because I can actually apply those techniques to my enamels. So I'm able to do everything in one spot. So.
But you did, your interest in enameling came after your education at...
Yes, I never knew. I'm sure I saw enamel pieces, but I never really knew what enameling was. That wasn't in my vocabulary, even at CCAD. We didn't have, they have a jewelry program there now, and they have enameling kilns. But when I went there wasn't anything like that. So I wasn't aware of like the folk colleges that you can go, crafting colleges. I was like, I didn't know those existed either. So my knowledge was very limited. But yeah, so it was when I was in 2017 when I found enameling.
Did you find it here at the Cultural Arts Center?
Yeah, I found it here. I didn't even know about the Cultural Arts Center until 2017.
Doing that.
Karana.
Oh, yeah.
So, yeah.
All right.
Thank you.
My story of how I found enameling is similar to Maureen's. Came down here and I started taking the jewelry classes and working with the silver and the copper, and I wanted to add color to the jewelry that I was doing. And I was like, well, how do I do that? And Karana is also the one who I took my first enameling classes from, and it just enticed me so much that I actually bought a kiln for my home. And that's during the pandemic when we were closed. I was still able to enamel because I was at home. And so, but what I found is all I was doing was just sifting the enamel on to pieces and doing single color pieces. I really wasn't doing a lot of colors and things like this until we got back from the pandemic and started coming down, and then I was asked to teach. And the more I learned about what was being taught as the beginner classes again, it was like, wait a minute, I've got more to do. Like I said, there's still a lot to learn. So that's my...
Well, Joyce and Jennifer and Maureen, wow, what a world you have taken us into. It was wonderful. And let's continue it by going out into the gallery. You can share this world of beauty.
I'll mention one thing when you get out and see. You're going to see some flowers out there. Those are done the same as this, but it's not enamel. Okay, the flowers, they are not enameled, okay? There's something called patina, where you can put them in with some chemicals that are in the air and that changes the colors. So they look like this, but they're not enamel, okay?
And next week, we're going to have Paul Weiss celebrating music. He's a singer and a piano player. So do first floor, yes, in the main gallery. So be with us. All right, lead us out.
Thanks, ladies. So here we are out here doing and showing you some of the pieces that are in the Cold Connection Gallery. My piece is the corner piece here with the cloisonne and then tab settings that are attached. to the back plate. So I did 4 different colors of enamel and then fired them with the wires in between each color, and then attached the copper backplate using tabs, and those have to be folded over, which makes it the cold connection. And that's how I did that piece. So we've got, and then as you can also see in here, here are the Patty Wilson, her pieces here, and then up here is the piece that was done by Karana with the frog that was also done, that Jennifer showed in the pictures earlier. So a lot of the other pieces that are out here are jewelry made cold connections. A piece that Maureen discussed, she was called fold forming. These earrings right here are fold forming and where they're joined and then just attached to the ear wire. So that's another piece there. The piece right behind it here is a cold connection. There are rivets holding the 2 pieces together. And the front piece has been forged, and that's the design that he chose to use, and the back plate, and then attached to a bolo tie cable.
This is similar to the flowers that I showed you inside. They're made exactly the same way. They're come from a sheet of copper. It's folded. And these are not enameled. This is called a patina. And if you take these and put them in a bucket and hang them in a closed bucket, in the bucket, one can put salt and ammonia, seal it off, wait about 24 hours, and come out, and you'll get just blue patina. You aren't always sure how it's going to turn out. There's a little hit and miss on it, but that's how these are made. Now, the stand for this thing, I did make that. We were supposed to do cold connections. I'm saying, what am I going to do? So this is a piece of copper. Then I folded it. Then I couldn't use the rivets on the inside because I couldn't push them. But I found some little bitty screws at the hardware store. So the base of this that's held together, it's held together by little tiny screws. And then the bottom part, there's a piece of metal, and then I took the metal and bent it down so that there's a ridge on the bottom, and then I could take and rivet the base to the cone and make a bottom. Now, needless to say, this will not hold water, okay? This is just a decorative picture, so I had something to put my flowers in.
To any other pieces and artists
Oh,
that you
there
may
is
know?
one more I forgot about.
One more here?
Here's one more of my pieces, okay? This bracelet, this is another example of fold forming. That's a piece of copper, and then it was flat, and then I folded the 2 edges over so that it's still one piece. And then these little slightly blue things that you see on here, they look a little like they might be enamel, but they're not. They are metal that I put in that patina solution and hung it and allowed it to change to that color. Now, if you notice, the bracelet has a lot of color to it. If you one takes a torch and one torches the metal,
We'll end it.
one can get these different colors with the flame. And again, that's a little bit magic. You aren't quite sure how it's going to turn out. You do it till you like what you see and you quit. And so that's how this thing was done.
Maureen, that was wonderful. Joyce, marvelous. And Jennifer, thank you. What a team you made and what beauty you brought here to our loft gallery. Thank you.